economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war.
If you do not understand racism, which is white supremacy, what it is and how it works, everything else that you understand will only confuse you. Confuse you. Confuse you. Confuse you. Confuse you. If you do not understand, confuse you. If you do not understand, confuse you. If you do not understand, confuse you. Confuse you.
My definition of white supremacy and racism, I use those two terms as synonyms. I use the same definition for both terms. That definition is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white.
Economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war.
What's the matter, boss? We sick.
Man lives in the sunlit world of what he believes to be reality. But there is, unseen by most, an underworld, a place that is just as real, but not as brightly lit. A dark side.
John Henry, the figure from American folklore who worked himself to death to beat a steam engine, is a key to understanding the medical reality of African Americans in the 21st century. According to researchers from Duke University Medical Center and their colleagues, African Americans continue to have poorer health than other groups, even though their economic situation has improved significantly, said the researchers. John Henryism is a coping style that has a clear genetic basis in African Americans and reflects clear personality traits, they reported. The effects of John Henryism are apparent in clinical and non-clinical settings, can influence emotional reactions, and may impact how African Americans function in their everyday lives, the researchers said. The findings from 4 studies that examine John Henryism and health outcomes among African Americans were presented on Friday, March 3, 2006, as a part of a symposium organized by Duke researchers at the American Psychosomatic Society's annual meeting in Denver. The studies were funded by the National Institute on Aging. Psychologists have formally recognized John Henryism as a style of strong coping behaviors used by many African Americans to deal with psychosocial and environmental stressors such as career issues, health problems, and even racism. The classical traits of John Henryism are seen among those African Americans who are extremely preoccupied with success, particularly in new environments with which they have little experience. Most commonly, people with John Henryism are extremely goal-oriented, but often lack the resources they need for success, such as financial or emotional support, the researchers said. People with high levels of John Henryism and inadequate resources have a much higher prevalence of health disorders, the researchers added. because they drive themselves toward reaching specific goals at the expense of their health, often without realizing they are doing so. I'll read that one more time. People with high levels of John Henryism and inadequate resources have a much higher prevalence of health disorders, the researchers added, because they drive themselves toward reaching specific goals at the expense of their health, often without realizing they are doing so.
What's the matter, boss? We sick.
A little record company called Archaeophone has released the earliest recordings of a man W.C. Fields called the funniest man I ever saw and the saddest I ever knew. Bert Williams was the star of the Ziegfeld Follies between 1910 and 1919. He sold thousands of recordings. He was also African American, and at the turn of the 20th century, that meant he performed in blackface. Elizabeth Yates McNamee has more on an influential but largely forgotten comedian.
Bert Williams began his show business career in the rugged logging and mining camps of California in the 1890s. He moved up to a minstrel troupe in San Francisco and then formed a comedy duo with George Walker. Together, they worked their way to New York, and within a few years, Bert Williams had made Broadway history.
Many consider him the greatest comedian of all time. Certainly, during his lifetime, he was considered to be as good as Chaplin or better.
Mel Watkins has just finished writing his third book on African American humor. He says that, like Charlie Chaplin, Bert Williams played a sad, luckless clown. But Williams's blackface clown was one of the two stock characters developed in minstrel shows, the variety entertainment popular since the 1840s. Those two ludicrous characters sang, danced, and told jokes.
There were two of them. One was the Jim Dandy figure, one was the slow, sluggish, ignorant darky figure. Bert Williams played that figure, the latter figure. It became a figure that was sort of the wise man in clown's garb. In this case, the wise man in darky garb.
Oh, when it's all going out and there's nothing coming in, Lord, that am the time when the trouble begins. Your money's getting low.
And always, Williams played this part wearing burnt cork and makeup that exaggerated his eyes and mouth. Mel Watkins says that blackface performance has a complicated history in American theater.
It was not considered racial when it started. It was a theatrical mask that whites wore, much as clowns wear large noses and so forth. When black performers started in minstrelsy, they continued it because minstrel performers all wore blackface.
Archaeophone Records was created by Richard Martin and Megan Hennessy to save the earliest recorded music from oblivion. They dig through private collections and haunt garage sales looking for old recordings. Then they digitize and restore them. Like this one from 1913, Bert Williams' signature hit, Nobody.
When life seems full of clouds and rain, and I am full of nothing and pain, who soothes my thumping brain? Nobody.
An actor and comedian. He directed and starred in the provocative and hilarious film Hollywood Shuffle. Townsend is now president and CEO of the Black Family Channel.
He was the highest paid performer at the Ziegfeld Follies for 10 years. That would be like the biggest show on Broadway, and he's the star. And he was the only African American that was up there.
But Robert Townsend acknowledges that there are good reasons for Williams's obscurity.
It's embarrassing because some of the most incredible comedians, incredible artists had to wear this burnt cork, and it's just that when, African Americans nowadays think of somebody putting on blackface, it's just real disgusting.
Townsend says that it's important to remember that Williams and Walker and other performers were playing standard stereotyped roles. On stage, they spoke in dialect, but not at home.
They created these characters. They weren't the characters. I used to watch those movies, and that vernacular would always kill me because it'd be like, I heard you were at the Battle of Bull Run. He goes, yeah, my great-granddaddy was at the Battle of Bull Run. He was the one who run. They would do these jokes, and so stupid that you would go, oh, man. But when you really heard them talk, they didn't talk that way.
The dialect and minstrel comic songs are preserved on this early recording. Bert Williams and his partner George Walker sound unrehearsed, spontaneous, much as they would have on the vaudeville stage of 1901. Archaeophone's Richard Martin.
It's just raw music. A couple of guys singing with a piano, and they're banging away on it, and it's very loud, and it's uncontrolled, and it's fun and funny, and you can tell they're having the time of their lives.
Good morning, good morning. How you do this morning? What you dreaming about me? Oh, I dream a little dreaming. Oh, that's all right. Now look your cat.
Really what we've got here is a little snapshot into the history of recorded music. I would say the closest you would come to it today is an album of outtakes.
Bert Williams collapsed on stage in February of 1922 and died soon after. He had become wealthy and enormously popular, and thousands attended his funeral. So why had W.C. Fields called Williams the saddest man I ever knew? Mel Watkins.
I think that he was sad because he was a very intelligent man who listened to operas, who read Nietzsche, who had a high school education but was very well-read and self-educated after that. He was basically a kind of elite individual, and had he been not black, he would have been accepted as such.
The comedy of that era, with its blackface, dialect, and funny songs, doesn't translate comfortably to our times. But Bert Williams's influence on American humor has lasted for over a century. For NPR News, I'm Elizabeth Yates McNamee.
You are now listening to P.A.R. That's People Activity Radio. And I'm your host, JohnGHorse. Welcome. You have found your family in a peaceful place. P.A.R. is a family-friendly information distribution program seeking to inform non-white people, in particular black classified, and assisting in counter-racist codification. The title of today's episode is The Tragic Legacy of Acting Black Within Anti-Black Pop Culture, Bert Williams, George Walker, and Aida Overton Walker. And I will repeat, the title of today's episode is The Tragic Legacy of Acting Black Within Anti-Black Pop Culture, Bert Williams, George Walker, and Aida Overton Walker. Let's get it in. Where do we begin? That's always the question. And I like to wish you and yours a safe quarantine. Let's move on.
What's the matter, boss? We sick.
Again, I will repeat the title of today's episode so we can all be on the same accord. And I will repeat one more again. The title of today's episode is The Tragic Legacy of Acting Black Within Anti-Black Pop Culture. Bert Williams, George Walker, and Aida Overton Walker. Who are they, you'll ask? JohnGHorse. Those are some of the trailblazing, quote-unquote, popular culture entertainers that found themselves subject to black classification, in particular Bert Williams, who is a well-renowned, arguably the first great entertainer recognized by the United States with black classification. Now that's to say, before he was recognized, there have been hundreds of people who would be classified as black during and before white terror domination that were geniuses in their own right. But for this particular show, we are going to talk about Bert Williams.
What's the matter, boss? We sick.
And his tragic legacy. And I say tragic legacy Because if you were listening to the first clip that I played before I played the NPR expose on Bert Williams, that first clip spoke about this term, this hypothesis, this theory that the Duke University researchers came up with. And this term is called John Henryism. Now, everybody who's subject to black classification has always heard from a family member, your great-grandmama, your grandmama, your granddaddy, your great-granddaddy, your uncles, your mama, your daddy, anybody in a leadership role in your immediate family. If you are subject to black classification, you have heard this statement. If you want to succeed at something, young man, if you want to succeed at something, young woman, in these here United States of America, you gotta work 5 times as hard as your white contemporaries. You gotta work 7 times as hard. You gotta work 10 times as hard. Man, some people even bring the number up to 15 times and 20 times as hard as your white contemporaries. And we take that and we roll with it. Well, researchers at Duke University, through their research, and Google that. I'm not trying to get all caught up in sources. Just Google John Henryism, Duke University. You'll get the article. Researchers at Duke University have concluded, and many authors about this subject have concluded, that that is not conducive to maximum or optimum mental and physical health. Matter of fact, it's bad for your health to take that mentality, to take that behavior and think it's normal and healthy. For example, Bert Williams, who's known as the greatest or the first great multi-skilled, multi-talented entertainer during the 1800s and 1900s. Bert Williams died at 47 years old from, hold on, let me get my notes because I don't want to give false information. But he died at a fairly young age at 47. And it was from some type of health complications. If I'm not mistaken, the man collapsed on stage while performing at the height of his so-called career. He's known for his depiction of the gambler while in full blackface garb. Now, if you don't understand what I mean when I say blackface, if you don't understand what I mean when I use the term minstrelsy, I did 2 shows on this topic. One was the racist, white supremacist origin of Hollywood, and the other was the creation of the coon. Both are on playlists on my YouTube channel, People Activity Radio, and I will take this time to say, if you find this information constructive, if you find this information worth your time, all I ask is that you subscribe and press the like button. Let's move on. Back to Bert Williams. So he would perform in full blackface garb with a woolly-haired wig because Bert Williams is of Bahamian, from the Bahamas, ethnic background. And he clearly was one of those Bahamians that was light beige with curly wavy hair. So in order for him to be accepted as a person classified as black without question, because during those times there were white people that would put on the blackface. During those times there were white people that would put on the wig. During those times there were white people who acted black. That was the thing to do. So he didn't want to be mistaken for a white person acting black, so he and his partner during the beginning of his career, George Walker, who for all intents and purposes was also a legendary entertainer in his own rights, they formed a union and a dynamic duo, and they called themselves the Two Real Coons. Just a little satire trying to let everybody know we really black. And all these imposters acting black. We gonna give it to you authentically and organically, which is very problematic. Because you sitting up here, I believe George Walker played the Zip Coon Dandy, which was a slick talking hustler. And he was extremely dark. I believe he was from the southern state of Virginia. I could be an error. You look up George Walker, you can figure it out. We're not really trying to get too bogged down in that type of subject matter, because I'm trying to get to my point about the John Henryism. Working 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, 10 times, 12 times, 15 times, 20 times as hard as your white contemporaries under the system of racism, white supremacy, or as Kamal Cambone calls it, white terror domination, or systematic anti-blackness, or systematic non-justice, systematic anti-black non-justice. We can go on and on with the terms so that you won't be confused. So he would perform in full blackface garb, top hat, black cork, white lips or red exaggerated lips with white exaggerated paint around the eyeballs. And George Walker was said to be better, if not just as good, as the well-known pantomime and suspected child predator Charlie Chaplin. Not gonna get bogged on and suspected white supremacist Charlie Chaplin, but he was a suspected child predator. There have been documents and evidence of his terroristic behavior on child actors and actresses. Let's move on. So they would say that Bert Williams was, if not just as good as Charlie Chaplin when it came to physical acting during the silent film era. He was better than him. And I suspect that he was better. I mean, just to give you an example of a person that's multi-talented, we know about Eddie Murphy. He's a stand-up comedian. He's an actor. He's a extremely skilled and gifted voiceover actor for Disney, as well as I believe Eddie Murphy on his own time produces music. He has one record that we all know, My Girl Like to Party All the Time, that he did with Rick James. Another comedic performer that displays this ability would be a brother by the name of Jamie Foxx. During these times, I mean, Jamie Foxx sings. I don't think he dances. And you got to understand, when you was a so-called entertainer back in the 1800s and early 1900s and you classified as black, you had to do it all. Sing, dance, rap, ragtime, and make everybody laugh, and have physical gestures, facial gestures, and precise comedic timing. If you were an entertainer, there was no avenue for you to practice your gift or your talent other than the Blackface minstrel circuit. You better believe it. You weren't going to be able to make no money no other way. So you will have people like Bert Williams and George Walker who had to go down that slippery, muddy road called minstrel troops. And again, if you're confused about what I mean by minstrel troops, burlesques, vaudeville, please refer to those episodes on the playlist. The Racist White Supremacist Origin of Hollywood and the other series I did called The Creation of Coons. Again, that all can be found on my YouTube channel, People Activity Radio, P.A.R. And if you find this information constructive, please, all I ask is you subscribe and press the like button. I really enjoy feedback. But let's move on. So Bert Williams cannot be mentioned unless you mention George Walker. It's like Abbott and Costello. You understand me? Any comedic duo that you always mention one and the other. Kenan and Kel for our younger listeners. You understand me? Under that context, George Walker was again a genius in his own right. And he married an extremely talented woman by the name of Aida Overton. And, once she married him, she took his last name. So we know her by her name, Aida Overton Walker. And she's said to be the first recognized choreographer in the popular culture entertainment industry with black classification, and she is called the Queen of the Cakewalk. And Bert Williams, who's said to be a genius, George Walker, who was said to be a genius, and Aida Overton Walker, for all intents and purposes, was a triple helping of supreme talent. And I can't do it justice, because you gotta understand it's very cosmetic when you're reading articles and reading literature on our ancestors. So I will let you hear it for yourself. I found this presentation on YouTube, and it's titled The Queen of the Cakewalk. Without further ado, you know how we do it here on People Activity Radio. Cue the clear.
What's the matter, boss? We sick.
Aida Overton Walker was a pioneer in black musical theater. As an actor, choreographer, dancer, and singer, Aida challenged the norm in portrayal of blacks on and off the stage. And though she was once one of the most famous African-American performers of the 20th century, she is often left out of history books and conversation until now. Born Valentine's Day in the year 1880, Aida Overton Walker had humble beginnings in Richmond, Virginia. Her family relocated to New York for better opportunities, and there, Aida's love of the arts was cultivated through music and dance lessons. She had her first performing opportunity with the Black Patty Troubadours as a chorus member. During this time, she met her husband, George Walker, a famous vaudevillian, and they began to produce shows together. They often performed the Cakewalk, which was a popular dance at the time. Aida was crowned the Queen of the Cakewalk due to her effortless dance moves and power to captivate. After much success, they joined forces with their dear friend and musical comedy genius, Bert Williams. Together, they created the famous duo Williams and Walker. Aida acted as the director and choreographer for the group, and they created all-black musicals such as In Dahomey, Abyssinia, The Red Moon, and Bandana Land. Their shows dominated stages and transformed theater from demeaning minstrels to song and dance that celebrated vivacious and beautiful black life. Even with the amazing success of Williams and Walker, Aida was not satisfied simply being behind the scenes. She simultaneously acted in musical theater performances, and she first received countrywide recognition for her role as Miss Hannah from Savannah in the show Sons of Ham. She continued to perform in musicals for the next 10 years, and went on to perform at Buckingham Palace for King Edward VII, becoming an international superstar almost overnight. The three performers were at the height of their careers, often being described as the most popular trio of colored actors in the world, when the dazzling era of the Williams and Walker duo came to an end. In 1911, George Walker died of a sudden illness at the age of 38. Most stories about Aida end with George's death, but outliving her husband 3 more years, Aida continued to perform, proving that she was not just a female sidekick to a fantastic duo, but a star in her own right. Aida joined the Smart Set Company, a black touring troupe, where she continued to perform in musicals such as His Honor, the Barber. During this time, Oscar Hammerstein's Salome, a risky vaudeville act, was becoming increasingly popular. In response, Aida choreographed arguably her most important piece to date. Aida Salome transformed a usually overtly sexual show into a modest representation of black women. Her version of Salome was performed at Hammerstein's Victoria Theater, which had been previously reserved for only white performers. Through her performance, she was able to combat stereotypes that all black women were loose and immoral. When asked about her choice, she explained, "I venture to think and dare to state that our profession does more toward the alleviation of colored prejudice than any other profession among colored people." Her performance was widely received and was often preferred over the more risque version. After her success of Salome, Aida toured different theaters in New York, performing as a man to pay homage to the success of Williams and Walker duo. Aida unexpectedly died October 11, 1914, at the age of 34 due to kidney failure. The country mourned the death of a star gone too soon. Dozens of newspapers praised her life in tribute articles and pictures. Because of the creativity and courage of Aida Overton Walker, the queen of the cakewalk, we have performers like Florence Mills and Josephine Baker that paved the way for African American performers everywhere. Aida Overton Walker was never afraid to break the norm and celebrate the pain, beauty, and strength of being a black performer, and for that, we honor and thank her.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Cakewalk.
What's the matter, boss? We sick.
And there you have it. That was a YouTube video titled Queen of the Cakewalk, posted by YouTuber Madeline Polson. Madeline Polson, again, that YouTube video is titled Queen of the Cakewalk, a tribute to Aida Overton Walker. Let's move on. So, one of the things that was extremely surprising to me, one of the things that caught my attention, one of the things that was fluttering in the wind like a piece of ripped material or a banner or a flag, to me, was Aida Overton Walker outlived her husband by 3 years, which isn't abnormal. Women usually live longer. than men do. It's just what it is. I'm not a medical doctor, so I don't know the reasons behind why, but I have my suspicions, especially when it comes to people who are subject to black classification. But let's move on. Aida Overton Walker outlived her husband by 3 years. And then the narrator said Aida passed away at 34 years old from medical complications. If you read information on Aida Overton Walker, I believe some literature claims that she suffered from kidney failure. Now listen, she outlived her husband by 3 years, and she died at 34. Her husband, George Walker, part of the dynamic duo Williams and Walker, part of the Zip Coon Dandy and the Shuffling Coon, and Bert Williams, who's said to be the first greatest entertainer in entertainment history, subject to black classification, played the Coon. The dark complected George Walker played the hustling dandy. Now, if you don't know what a dandy is and what a coon is, again, I'll send you to my video article series called The Creation of the Coon. You can find it on the playlist of my YouTube channel, People Activity Radio, P.A.R., and it is me, JohnGHorse, who narrates and or critiques social studies in the 9 areas of all people activity. But I digress. 34 years old is too doggone young to just be falling over and dying. 38 years old is too young to just be falling over and dying. Bert Williams, who is passed away at 47, still is too young to be falling over and dying. And these are people who are living high off the hog, as some would say. High off the hog, meaning they were extremely wealthy in their day. Some of the highest paid entertainers, some of the most traveled entertainers. I mean, they traveled the world distributing this plantation culture called Blackface Minstrelsy. I'm telling you right now, one of the number one products that the United States of America distributed worldwide once it became a global power was Blackface Minstrelsy. So when you have people who are classified as black globally, who are known to be the oldest, most ancient, autochthonous peoples on the planet, you know what comes with that? You have the longest history and contribution to humanity on the planet. When this number one product distributed around the world, the number one product by the name of Blackface Minstrelsy distributed around the world from the United States of America, hit all areas of the globe. It obliterated the dignity. It obliterated the heritage. It obliterated the ancient legacy and contribution to humanity that all people globally, origine people, melanin dominant people, dark brown people, ancient people, the original people contributed to society. It obliterated it, and it placed you in these caricatures. These plantation caricatures. The Mammy, the Plantation Buck, the Jezebel, the Tragic Mulatto, the zip coon dandy, the shuffling coon. You understand me? It places you in these caricatures and you have no wiggle room to say, I come from people that studied the stars. I come from people that studied medicine. I come from people that introduced plumbing. I come from people that introduced electricity, math, science, on and on and on. You are reduced by way of the number one product distributed by the United States of America once the United States of America became a global power around the late 1800s to the 1920s. When it became a global power, you had this culture of acting black, distributed by the white supremacist propaganda wing that we call the Hollywood/entertainment industry of the United States of America. Let me ask another question since we're talking about John Henryism, and I'm going to try to keep the rant at a low level, family. I'm a work in progress. I know I promised in the new year that I wouldn't be ranting, but again, this stuff gets into my pores because I'm talking about my group. I'm not talking about no people of color. You understand me? I am talking about people who are subject to black classification worldwide, who have to walk around and dispel and or confirm caricatures created by people who classify themselves as white and have let us know every living day that they being in charge that they believe in racism and white supremacy. They created these caricatures. You understand me? And then they painted themselves black with black cork. I'm talking about people who classify themselves as white and believe in white supremacy. They painted themselves black with exaggerated white and red lips, with exaggerated white eyeballs, top hat, white gloves, clown suit, loose-fitting, kempt, ripped, hobo-ish clothing. And it was speaking a vernacular that they could barely understand, but exaggerating uneducated people who were subject to enslavement and or black classification in these United States of America. And some of the people who performed these acts, some of the best black mimickers, were the most legendary entertainers in white contemporary entertainment history. Some examples of these entertainers you cringe when you're looking at the shows. The variety show, the minstrel show, the vaudevillian act. You understand me? So, why in the world are black entertainers who are wealthy, who are rich, who are the most paid? They were equivalent to millionaires. I'm talking about Bert Williams. I'm talking about George Walker. I'm talking about Aida Overton Walker. Why is she dropping at age 34? Why is George Walker dropping at 38? Why is doggone Bert Williams dropping at 47? Let me tell you why. Because they were acting like this thing called black. Black ain't had nothing to do with them. You heard in the clip that I played from NPR when they were talking about Bert Williams' legacy in his career. Robert Townsend, known for directing and writing Hollywood Shuffle, he made a statement saying that these people created these characters, and I disagree with Robert Townsend. People who are classified as black did not create those characters. People that are classified as black were subject to those caricatures that made people who were classified as white feel comfortable during their terroristic reign of white terror domination in the 1800s. So as they were dominating people who were classified as black, it made it much more acceptable if you portrayed people who were classified as black as happy plantation bucks, mammies, wenches, and coons. You understand me? So they not even human. Look at these bucks, always dancing and singing. They ain't got no responsibilities. They don't want no responsibility. They lazy, they shiftless. The women, all they want is a white man to lay down with. That's why we can run around and rape them and the men. You understand me? Everything that was done on the plantation was done to both black males and black females. All of it. Till can't see it in the morning, till can't see it at night, but let's move on. I'm trying to talk about John Henryism and how it's killing us. Working 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, 20 times as hard as your white contemporaries. Put you in the grave fast. Bert Williams, 47. George Walker, 38. Aida Overton Walker, 34. Deceased. Sick from the toxins of racism, white supremacy. Sick from the toxins of white terror domination. Sick from the toxins of acting black in an anti-black popular culture industry called the minstrel circuit, called vaudeville, called Hollywood. You understand me? Eventually morphed into what we know as the Chitlin Circuit. The Chitlin Circuit produced some of the greatest performers. Sammy Davis Jr. What's the brother's name? They did the tap dancing. There was a song sung about him, a favorite song sung by Sammy Davis Jr. Mr. Bojangles. I'm sorry for not having his name. Red Fox. Pigmeat Markham. Moms Mabley. Dolomite. I mean, all these people I name are in the tradition of the Chitlin Circuit. The Chitlin Circuit is a refined version of Blackface, Minstrelsy, Vaudeville. I can go on and on how these anti-black caricatures that were created by people who classify themselves as white and believe in white supremacy have been seeped and drenched into what we believe as people who are classified as black is our culture. This mess is not our culture. We are subject to these behaviors, and we have been, like in prison, we have been taught to accept this as black behavior and black culture. It is not. This stuff is killing us softly. The name of the show is People Activity Radio. And there are 9 areas of people activity that we have been dominated in. And the 9 areas of people activity is economics, education, entertainment. Are you following me? Entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. And I get those 9 areas from the Honorable Elder Neely Fuller Jr. in his book called The Compensatory Concept for Victims of Racism, White Supremacy. I ain't no victim. JohnGHorse. Oh, here y'all go with the victim talk. If you subject to black classification and you're behind walk to the mirror and you looking at a person that's brown, but you calling yourself black, that means you've been conditioned in an unorganic, unnatural system of non-justice. Number one thing you can do is lie to somebody of who they are and what they are. You sitting here as a kid learning the doggone colors, and they say brown, and you put the doggone crayon to your skin, or the light brown crayon to your skin, or the beige crayon to your skin, or your copper colored, penny colored crayon to your skin, and it matches your skin, but you didn't tell yourself that I'm black. You're a victim. Sorry, players. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, you're a victim. You don't even know colors coming up out this system, but let's move on. As I'm reading this story, I had to put this part in, family. As I was researching Bert Williams, and I ran across his dynamic triple threat group that he started with, Aida Overton Walker and George Walker. I ran across an article about when George Walker and Bert Williams were at the height of their career in New York City, I believe, in 1900. And Bert Walker went right, and it said that Bert Williams went right to go home, and George Walker went to a tragic left. And I was thinking, wait a minute, what do you mean a tragic left? And then it began to talk about the race riot in 1900 that took place in New York City. Now, let me tell you something. George Walker and Bert Williams were the number one grossing entertainers at that time in New York City. But we have to understand that Bert Williams was extremely light complected. And to the naked eye, if you wasn't close up on him, if he had a hat on or something like that and an overcoat, you'd think he's a white man walking down the street. At that time, George Walker was extremely dark complected. Yeah, wherever he went, he was not going to be mistaken for nothing but a Negro. Now, I'm saying that to say this. There was a case where there was a murder of a detective in New York City, which sparked off a so-called race riot. And I'm going to read an article, a quick read of an article from blackpast.org, written by Will Mack, contributed by Will Mack, and the article was written in November 22nd, 2017, and it is titled The New York City Race Riot. And it reads, the 1900 New York race riot began following an incident between Arthur J. Harris, a black man, and a white undercover police officer, Robert J. Thorpe, outside the apartment of Harris and his girlfriend, May Enoch, in the Tenderloin section of New York City. At 2 a.m. on August 13, Harris witnessed Thorpe grabbing Enoch, meaning the white undercover police officer grabbed the brother's girlfriend, whom Thorpe believed to be a prostitute soliciting customers. So the white police officer accusing Thorpe's girlfriend of being a prostitute. Harris, not knowing that Thorpe was a police officer, attacked Thorpe and cut him with a knife. Both Harris and Enoch fled the scene, meaning he killed the person that's classified as white and fled the scene. Harris left for his mother's home in Washington, D.C., and Enoch ran into her apartment where she was later arrested. Thorpe, who was also the son-in-law of acting Captain John Cooney of the local 20th Police Precinct, was taken to Roosevelt Hospital where he died the next day. The Tenderloin was a traditionally Irish section of New York that was becoming increasingly integrated by Southern black migrants looking for work in New York. Thorpe's death pushed racial tensions between the two groups in the neighborhood to the edge, meaning it was already racial tensions because people who classify themselves as white had already unionized within the so-called law enforcement agencies, and they were terrorizing black people all the time. But let me get back to the article. That's JohnGHorse talking. That's not what the article is saying. But let's get back to the article, and it reads, on August 15th, the day before Thorpe's funeral, a fight broke out near Thorpe's family home between a white man, Thomas J. Healy, and a black man, Spencer Walters. Walters was beaten to near death by a white mob that gathered. The assault touched off the riot. Now, hold on now. They done jumped a brother nearby during the funeral. Okay, let me continue reading the article. I'm sorry. The word spread that blacks would be assaulted, and they were soon attacked by white street gangs. No, white police officers. What's the street gang? Let me continue. Street gangs throughout the Tenderloin and surrounding areas. Black people were randomly assaulted as they returned home from work, prompting many to stay at their place of employment rather than return to their residence. And I'm going to stop right there. Because Bert Williams and George Walker were leaving their place of employment that night. George Walker got pulled out of a streetcar, and the white supremacists put some work in on George Walker. One of the most highest paid entertainers in that time, with #1 selling records, Coon Records, in the 1900s. One of the only black entertainers with his contemporary Bert Williams to perform on Broadway. But let me get back to the article, because this is how I ran into this, because I was reading about George Walker and he got his behind whooped one night leaving the doggone theater by a white mob, and I found out it was because it was a race riot popping that night. Anything black was gonna get attacked. Back to the article. New York City Mayor Robert Van Wyck and Police Chief William Devery sent 700 police into Tenderloin to quell the rebellion. Black men and women, however, were disproportionately arrested during the riot, and many were severely beaten while in police custody. Lord have mercy. It was a green light free for all. I guess we just took this and turned our cheek, huh? On August 16, the riot subsided. The next day, black people began arming themselves, and a Black Defense Committee, the Citizen Protective League, CPL, was formed on September 3rd. Approximately 35 people were arrested and 60 people injured during the riot, mostly black people. There were no reported deaths. For more than a month after the riot, daily incidents of racial violence continued, and police reported that blacks threw bricks, bottles, and garbage at them from the rooftops. No legal action was ever taken against the police involved in the riot, despite pleas from the CPL and widespread accusations of police brutality against black people in the New York City press. Harris was arrested and convicted in the death of Thorpe and was sentenced to life in prison. He died there on December 20th, 1908. But let me get back to the part that I want to emphasize. On August 16th, the riot subsided. The next day, black people began arming themselves, and a Black Defense Committee, the Citizens Protective League, CPL, was formed on September 3rd. Let me tell you something. Where you gonna run, where you gonna hide? Under the system of racism and white supremacy, ain't nobody to run tail. The police department, the local police department, the police chief, the mayor, the governor, everybody are suspected and self-proclaimed racist white supremacists, even in the northern state that we call New York City. You can be acting like a coon, a clown, a mammy, a buck, a Jezebel, whatever you want to act like. You can make people laugh and cry, white folks laugh and cry and entertain them, but at the end of the day, we are in a system of racism, white supremacy, white terror domination, systematic anti-blackness. Any day your number could come up. And George Walker, one of the first black entertainers to be allowed to perform on the white stage that we call Broadway, got that work. What can we learn from this? We can learn that, number one, if you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. There's nothing wrong with wanting to laugh. There's nothing wrong with having a sense of humor. But under the context of racism and white supremacy, people who classify themselves as black have to maintain a militant disposition, not because it's a fad, not because it's the thing to do, not because white folk are comfortable with it, because we are under a system of racism, white supremacy, white terror domination, systematic anti-blackness, systematic anti-black non-justice. This system is designed to kill you. Aida Overton Walker, 34 years old. George Walker, 38 years old, Bert Williams is said to be the first great entertainer with black classification, dead at 47 years old. John Henryism, working to death, everybody collapsing on the stage. Man, take some time off. The show don't have to always go on. You understand me? And all this acting black is toxic to your spirit. We are not black. Whatever that is. Black classification is a created caste. That's what it is. It's the bottom caste. Black classification has no history. People who are subject to black classification have a history and have a legacy. We are indigenous. We are Aborigine people. We are autochthonous people. Wherever you go on earth, we are the first nation people. Don't matter if you're in Australia. Don't matter if you're in Vietnam. Don't matter if you're in Nigeria. Don't matter if you're in Georgia, Texas, California, Florida, Mississippi, Virginia. We are the Aborigine people. We have a legacy beyond the plantation. We have a legacy beyond the Blackface minstrel circuit. Pickaninnies, coon, shucking and jiving. You understand me? Scratching when we don't itch. Laughing when it ain't nothing funny is not our history. It is a condition we find ourselves in currently because we are being dominated by people who classify themselves as white and believe in the system of white supremacy. So I will close this episode with a video, and the video is titled Black History of the Cakewalk, and I think this is appropriate because it talks about the origins of the Cakewalk, and I think we will find it extremely interesting. Every time we talk about black people, you can throw a rock up and we always wind up talking about Indians, but I'm not going to even get on that. But you know my position. People who are subject to black classification in the United States of America, 9 times out of 10, you descend from ancient, copper-colored, Aborigine Americans, which are Native Americans, which are Indians. But I digress. But you know how we do here? Without further ado, a Black History video on the history of the Cakewalk. Cue the clip.
What's the matter, boss? We sick.
Little known Black history fact is about the Cakewalk. The Cakewalk was a couples dance originated by slaves in North America around the early 1900s. It was originally known as the Chalk Line Walk, adapted from the Seminole Indians. The walkers would walk a straight line and balance buckets of water on their heads. Eventually, the Cakewalk became the only approved way to mock the white masters in the Big House. The dance would be held at the master's plantation, and he would in turn serve as a judge. Which dance was performed? Well, that was determined by the type of cake presented. That same cake was awarded to the winning couple. Slaves and servants were encouraged to mock the masters at the Cakewalk. The dancers wore their best clothing and imitated the white men and women. Some plantation owners would bake a special cake called a hoe cake, wrapped in cabbage leaf for the Cakewalk, and invited the neighbors over again to watch the slaves perform. The prize included a hoe cake for the males and molasses pulled candy for the ladies. The winning slaves would get the cake or candy, possibly giving birth to the term, "that takes the cake." That's your little known Black history fact. For BlackAmericaWeb.com, I'm Erica Taylor.
What's the matter, boss? We sick.
And there you have it. I didn't want to say it. I just wanted to let you hear the presentation. And that was a YouTube video titled Black History, the History of the Cakewalk. And somehow or another, we seem to think that by saying that we're mocking the quote-unquote slave master by doing a mimicry of them in this cakewalk with exaggerated high steps and leaning back with our top hat and our black face and our black cork and our exaggerated white lips and our exaggerated big white eyeballs, we seem to think that by saying that we are mocking our dominators, that in actuality, that is constructive behavior. Let me tell you something. What you need to be doing is trying or creating a culture of replacing the system of racism, white supremacy with a system of justice by any means necessary. Now you read into that however you want to read into it, but those of you who are codified, you know what I'm talking about. Let me move on past that. I don't want to report nothing, promote anything that's gonna get anybody in trouble up on this platform that we call YouTube. That being said, every time you're talking about black folks, you always wind up finding Indian culture in it or Native American culture in it. And I'm going to tell you, there's a reason why, but this is not what this show was about. If you want to hear my position on the Native American legacy of foundational black Americans, look on my YouTube channel. I have a video article breaking down my position. And again, if you find any of this information constructive, feel free to push the thumb up button and subscribe. Be greatly appreciated, and feel free to give comments about anything. Oh, JohnGHorse, you don't know what you're talking about. JohnGHorse, you do have a point. JohnGHorse, cat, dog, anything, doesn't matter to me. Any type of critique or criticism is welcome here on P.A.R. Because you know what? I don't know everything. I could be in error. But as far as I'm concerned, we find ourselves in a system of racism, white supremacy, and we need to start fixing that problem. The number one problem on the planet. But I digress. I'm going to leave you with the number one song, the most acclaimed song that Bert Williams is known for, and it's called Nobody. It's a jazz, rap, ragtime type song. He had a slick cadence that could be attributed to people who are classified as black. And let me tell you something, people who are classified as black have been rhyming and talking and rapping long before the hip-hop industry decided to monetize it. And the hip-hop industry, I have concluded, is not owned by anybody who is classified as black. It is owned, financed, and produced by people who classify themselves as white. And I here on P.A.R. believe, JohnGHorse they believe in racism, white supremacy. I do not find anything out of the hip-hop industry remotely constructive, conducive to people who are classified as black. I don't see anything that is helping feed the mentality, the militant disposition that people who are classified as black need to take as it pertains to our survival. And I don't hear nobody talking about replacing the system of racism, white supremacy with a system of justice. From the rooter to the tutor. All that golden age of hip-hop and all that. I'll do a show on that. But I digress. But rap is fundamentally a foundational black American practice. But it has been thoroughly dominated and taken over by those who finance and own the hip-hop industry. I do not think that the art of rhyme should be called hip-hop. Hip-hop is a genre of rap. I hope I didn't confuse you on that, because you know here on P.A.R. we hope to remove confusion. But I digress. I will leave you with a song by Bert Williams, his number one song. The number one song he's known for. The number one grossing album of his time. Bert Williams, called Nobody. And I will leave you with a question, because Neely Fuller Jr. says always, when you want to solve problems, you start with questions and answers. My question to you, my question to the listeners on here, the people who find People Activity Radio a constructive program, my question to you, why would mainstream America accept this song, Nobody, as acceptable to be produced and distributed globally in a system of racism, white supremacy? Does it promote? Does it feed? Does it refine? Does it help maintain the white supremacist mentality? Questions and answers. My answer is hell yeah, it do. My answer is people who classify themselves as white and believe in racist white supremacy drink black tears like morning tea. Drink black sorrow like hot chocolate. You understand me? The more you whining and moaning and groaning about getting your behind whooped, the more you putting out that bluesy energy, it is letting them know that they are doing correct by keeping their foot on your neck. So you know how we do here on People Activity Radio. Bert Williams, Nobody, number one hit of pop music, 1906. The song is titled Nobody. Cue Declare.
What's the matter, boss? We sick.
When life seems full of clouds and rain, and I am full of nothing and pain, who soothes my thumping, bumping brain? Nobody. When winter comes with snow and sleet, and me with hunger and cold feet, who says here, 25 cents? Go ahead and get something to eat. Go on, why don't you, huh? Nobody.
Straight no chaser. Balls. This is JohnGHorse, and I hope I have contributed to less confusion. And always remember, keep learning and stay codified.
Economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war.
If you do not understand racism, which is white supremacy, what it is and how it works, everything else that you understand will only confuse you. Confuse you. Confuse you. Confuse you. Confuse you. If you do not understand, confuse you. If you do not understand, confuse you. If you do not understand, confuse you. Confuse you.
My definition of white supremacy and racism, I use those two terms as synonyms. I use the same definition for both terms. That definition is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white.
Economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war.